But then that model of plantations continued to travel. So I mean, it went from Haiti to Cuba, I mean, to Colombia to Brazil. I mean, all these plantations are so fundamental to, unfortunately, to our world right now, and how these countries gain power, and how they oppress, and how they gain capital, how they became wealthy. So I think, you know, particularly in a place like New Orleans, with its history of slavery, I think it's really important to think about plantations, particularly in an area like this. I think for some reason, you know, I think it's not talked about enough, but NOMA exists on a former plantation, our plantation. So when thinking about that fact as well, going back to the idea of who feels excluded from space, who feels comfortable in space, I think that's something that has to be thought about, because, you know, on top of existing, you know, on literal plantation land from 1915 until 2017, in front, at the entrance, the greeting of this land was the statue of the Confederate General. You know, so it's like, when thinking mentally about land and how people feel comfortable and excluded from different places, I think that's something important to think about too. I mean, I think, you know, as we move forward, you know, we really have to think about what needs to be done to correct that. So internally, we can think about different things, whether it's making, you know, hiring practices different, or changing the way, you know, changing what subjects are on the walls. But there's, I think, so much work that needs to be done outside the building as well. Whether that is working with artists, or working with, I think, you know, part of it, you know, I was, this past Friday, I actually had the privilege of going to a voodoo ceremony in Congo Square. And, you know, it was intense, but I remember talking to some of the participants in the ceremony after, just about like the healing that had to be done before they even had that ceremony. Because Congo Square obviously has its own complex history, and I think in the South, all of this land has complex history. So if this was a plantation, no telling what the stories that these trees on this land probably have. So I think when thinking about how you really revolutionize the way people feel comfort in space, you have to think about the land, you have to think about this form of plantation. And I think it all just goes back to just that idea of blackness, because like I said, it's something that we did not create, and it's something that we have to now really wrestle with on a daily basis, and then we all have to wrestle with on a daily basis. So that's about it. I'd love to open up for questions and conversation. Any questions about this or me or anything? Yeah.
So the setup, is there any reason why you particularly or 2, 2, 1, 6?
So I'm not the curator of this exhibition, but if Katie is the curator, so
Sure, because the pieces that are together seem to have like a flow, but also these pieces also go together. And it's just something I want to know, like, why would you transport the space? Why would you make this
So a lot of what Torkwase as an artist is inspired by are these dives that she takes off the coast of Gulf of Mexico, all throughout the world. Like this experience that she has of being like completely submerged into the water in this like very dark space and trying to find her relationship to her body and understand where she is, inspires a lot of the way that she works with abstraction. So we kind of chose or created these groupings a bit to make you feel almost as if you yourself are circling around these forms. So if you notice, like many of the works have the sort of same shape within them, but organized spatially a little bit differently, almost as if you're moving around them, or the white forms that you see are like trying to circumnavigate them or impact them. I think it's a way of asking us to look at the tools of painting, color and shape and form, and imagine new forms of possibility for the way we organize ourselves and our society. And kind of like Nic is speaking about, thinking about new forms of thinking in the museum, breaking down walls and barriers, like how can painting and using the tools of painting help us do that. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just on that point with water, that's another thing I think about this exhibition that resonates. When we're thinking about Black people in America, water, that association to it is deep. It is how and why we are here. I was recently in Puerto Rico in September, and I had to take a ferry to Vieques, and I realized I think this is my first time on this body of water. And I was like, it made me think about that being a question for just Black people, Black experience. When was the first time we were on the Atlantic Ocean? In this lifetime. It's it's just, so I think the idea of water that's associated with her practice is something that also speaks to me, I think, as well, because we have, as Black people, such a deep history with it. And even going spiritually, so in the practice of Vodou, it's believed that when you're born, you come from the water, when you die, you go back to the water. So that in itself, just those layers of water and its meaning to Black people is something that I think is really interesting.
I think about it too, with her work and abstraction, just the colors that she used, and finding out about the fact that a lot of the plantations of Louisiana were indigo plantations, and then thinking about that and looking at her work, it's such a connection.
Why would you make abstract paintings about such real issues? And I feel like that's a really interesting question to think about. If you're speaking about histories of the plantation, you're speaking about these really hard and complicated histories that we're trying to talk about and excavate, why would you make something abstract? And I would be curious what your thoughts about that would be.
Yeah, I think abstraction allows multiple interpretations of something. I like the fact that with this, you can go so many different ways. We can talk about the indigo, we can talk about the color black itself in relationship to race. We can talk about plantation. We can talk about the mapping aspects of it. I think with my own work too, I think abstraction allows you to put something out into the world that everyone can kind of pull a different part of their own connection or experience to. I think it also, in some ways, it allows you to sometimes go deeper, because I think there's so many connections, in regards to the plantation of within the American system and within the American fabric. Recently, I learned about this crazy connection between KFC and the private prison system, and just that, and that system, so the founder, there's an organization or a company called Core Civic. Core Civic is a $1.8 billion publicly traded company. One of the founders of that used to run a cotton plantation in Texas. So that's a conversation that you can then have around abstract work that's dealing with plantations and Blackness and the history of America. So I think it just opens the net up wider to be able to have many different conversations. So.
Thank you for having this conversation, because it's unusual to have the artist up front and giving a perspective. And I guess I have a question, and it was asked to Teresita Fernandez on her mural in the sculpture garden. She said the influences were New Orleans, Cuba, and Chicago, and different aspects of that. But when you got around to asking her, does it represent this? She said, no, it's an abstraction. So I'm real curious about how the process works in the artist head, where you expose yourself to all of these islands of facts and figures and images, etc. And how do you get from that to an abstract work? How does that process happen? Is it just absorption of those things? And I'm curious how that works with an artist and their soul and mind. How does that?
Yeah, I can speak for myself.
Please.
Please.
But I just used her as an example.
Yeah, I think the piece I was just referencing, or the fact I was just referencing about Core Civic his connection to KFC. So I made a piece about that connection. And so it's an assemblage piece. It's a print, you can buy, it's a photograph, but it combines the Confederate flag, the United States flag, and it has different pieces of cotton, Kentucky Fried Chicken, guns. It has different elements that are, essentially very American. That, is conceptual, but it's also abstraction, I think. Because, if you look at that work, I've had so many different interpretations of that. I had some people say, it's very humorous because you see this Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket, in front of this Confederate flag on top of this United States flag. I've had some people say, it's, because the piece is entitled Family Dinner. So it's showing this connection, but also there's so many different, I had one person say, all these things in this photo are so accessible. That was one of my students' interpretation of it. He was like, guns are so accessible, chicken is so accessible. But he until, I talked to him about the piece, about the inspiration behind it, he wasn't going to, Kentucky Fried Chicken helped fund the largest private prison corporation in the world, because that is a very research-based approach that I took to create the piece. But my hope is that, creating something that, has so many different meanings and ways that you can go with it, it just, like I was saying, Katie's question just opened up so many different conversations that can be had. So I think as an artist, the goal is to create something from your experience or your perspective that makes people feel something, but also makes people talk about something. So I think, when thinking about abstraction or conceptual work, I think that's the goal, at least in my opinion.
Thank you.
Are you associated with any art gallery in the city?
I'm not. Maybe one day.
You can buy your work online.
You're right, sure. If you are interested in buying my work, you can purchase that online. Thank you for that point. Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you all for coming.